Most of our participants who discussed the implementation of middle school practices and programs characterized it as disappointing and too focused on structural changes. Sue Swain described the current status of implementing the middle school ideal. One of the challenges we're facing today is that there are still too many middle schools that too narrowly define themselves. They may have changed the school's name and grade configuration from junior high to middle school. They may have even started to implement some of the middle-level organizational structures, such as teaming or block scheduling, but they have only begun the journey and have stalled out. They haven't implemented teaming or block scheduling to their fullest possibilities. They still talk about interdisciplinary units of study done periodically throughout the year, rather than a more fully integrated curriculum on a daily basis. In too many places, the middle-level concept has never been fully implemented with consistency over time. Too many states still do not prepare teachers or administrators specifically to teach this age group in the same way they require professional preparation for elementary and high school educators. However, we have schools and school districts throughout our country that have fully implemented the middle school concept, and they prove this thing called middle school works. These schools have also made commitments to provide ongoing professional development and to hire new teachers specifically prepared in middle-level education whenever possible. It's going to take this type of consistent commitment over time to reach the goal of successful middle schools for all young adolescents. Some of the traditional components of middle school organization are easy to sell and fairly easy to implement. For example, many of our participants pointed out that teachers and schools were attracted to the idea of teaming. Teachers were drawn to the idea of collaboration and affiliation with their colleagues and students. Therefore, middle schools quickly organized teachers into teams. However, they lost sight of the purposes of teaming and other middle school practices. John Lounsbury lamented that.
I think probably my greatest disappointment in the development of the middle school movement has been the failure of teams to take advantage of common planning time and to take advantage of the opportunity to improve curriculum. I think in part we made a great stride forward and we won't go back. Teaming has become well established and well it should. But because we organized our teams by subject area, we still taught by subject area. And if you go into most middle schools today with teams, they are still departmentalized in their instruction, with limited exceptions. An occasional interdisciplinary unit, an occasional correlation, but by and large, most middle schools still teach subjects. So I think that's been a big disappointment that we haven't taken advantage of the concept of teaming with common planning time to really alter curriculum and instruction. We've done a great job of dealing with kids and their needs, case conferences. We've done a good job of taking care of a lot of things in common planning time, meeting with parents, avoiding giving tests on the same day and those sort of things, but we really haven't taken advantage of what teaming really is designed to do.
While teaming in an organizational sense has been a fairly easy practice to implement, advisory has not. VAR suggested that
the mechanics of making an advisory work, especially if all teachers are required to take a group, are destroying the whole concept.
He explained that the intent of advisory programs is to provide a guidance element to a young adolescent's middle school experience. VARS believes that teams should be given the freedom to decide how they will incorporate the advisory responsibility into their work. He believes that teachers who have the aptitude or willingness to do advisory should be given that opportunity. He also contends that advisory cannot be relegated to a particular time of the school day.
A kid doesn't wait until advisory period to have a spat with his girlfriend or to have a crisis come up. The team has to get on it right when it happens, and therefore it needs to be embedded in the team.
Chris Stevenson believes that one of the major mistakes made in implementing middle school practices and programs was that it was too incremental, that leaders tried to implement middle school practices a little at a time. Perhaps they organized teachers into teams one year and then implemented an advisory program the following year. Now he's convinced that
you can't change a school a little piece at a time. It's got to be an overhauling of a school, a traditional school, to move it in the direction of the middle level concept.
He maintains that kids seem to handle big changes easily and to welcome them. He says that early on the logic of making changes incrementally seduced him. This same logic has clearly influenced change in middle-level education, often with a partial or half-hearted attempt at implementation. John Swaim concurred.
A lot of middle schools that made the pragmatic changes never made the philosophical changes.
He contends that we still have a lot of those out there. Sue Swaim also argued that you just can't tinker with the education of young adolescents. You've got to go the full mile with it. She further explained that the recommendations and characteristics of what make a successful middle school are interrelated. For example, providing a positive learning environment means addressing students' safety, wellness, and learning styles. Adults work together in middle schools for the purpose of ensuring that the curriculum is challenging, motivating, relevant, and engaging. Middle school leaders and innovators can no longer have a checklist or a menu mentality about implementing best practices for middle-level schooling. Such an approach is too simplistic to provide for the complex needs of young adolescents. Johnston warned about procedural orthodoxy. He explained that
So a middle school has really evolved from being this list of practices to being a commitment, I think, to produce high achievement, to be developmentally responsive, and to promote social equity.
while also taking into consideration the unique needs of the students and community served by a particular middle school. In other words, the commitment to ideals must be steadfast, but the implementation of practices must be somewhat flexible. Ken McEwen recounted a prophetic warning Bill Alexander made very early in the middle school movement.
He said we had to be really careful and not standardize is the way he put it, not standardize the American middle school.
McEwen maintained that
So there's certain essential elements that ought to be in every middle school, but how those are implemented, of course, depends on the students and the teachers and the community.
John Arnold proposed that in developing middle schools, 4 key questions need to be addressed in order.
1. Who? Who are these students we are trying to educate? What are their needs, interests, and abilities? This is the developmental question. 2. What? What do they need to know now and are likely to need to know in the future to meet their needs, interests, and abilities? This is the curriculum question. 3. How? What strategies and techniques shall we use to teach the content and skills that meet the students' needs, interests, and abilities? This is the methodology question. 4. How can we structure the school experience so that it best facilitates the methods and curriculum to meet the students' needs? This is the school organization question.
Arnold believes that the schools have failed to address the first 3 questions adequately, and in fact, they have reversed the order of the questions.
They've started with and been preoccupied by the organization question. Once the organization is set, that of course limits what kinds of methods and curriculum you can develop, and then you can only hope that the kids' needs will be met.
The good news is that we now have a growing body of research to support empirically the implementation of middle school practices and structures. McEwen discussed in his interview and has found in his research that middle schools that more authentically follow the middle school concept have higher standardized test scores in reading and mathematics than do randomly selected middle schools. Other studies have found that middle schools that have high levels of implementation of programs and practices associated with the middle school concept have higher achievement scores than schools that have only partially implemented the middle school plan. McEwen stated,
More middle school to middle school, the higher the scores.
Indeed, these findings are significant, for they provide much needed evidence for leaders who advocate for middle school practices. To realize the ideal of appropriate education for young adolescents, we must have leaders committed to wholehearted implementation. Vars stated,
People want the shape of a middle school, but aren't willing to do the hard work of developing staff, students, and parents who support the kind of education that you and I might say that is needed.
It is time for middle school leaders to roll up their sleeves and get back to the labor of full-scale implementation of appropriate education for young adolescents.